don't know if you've ever found yourself walking into a party or a gathering for work, and you're handed one of these not so fancy name tags. And you're asked, you're encouraged, you're supposed to take your little Sharpie and write something on that, right? The question is, what do you write? What do you write in that name tag? Some of you might draw little smiley faces. Some of you might, do squiggly lines. Some of you just write your name. Some of you, write your favorite movie character just to see if anyone will get it. All kinds of things. What you write, though, is probably some variation of your name depending on the setting that you find yourself in. Like for example, if I'm at something with my kids, I might write Mr. Poole because that's how, I might be known there. Or if it's something for the church, I might write Pastor Nick. If it's a family reunion where a lot of my family comes together, I would probably write Nikki because that's what they know me as. Or if it's just some random group of people, I just write Nick. And this is a moment that we've all experienced at some point in life. And what you write on that name tag is really just a small snapshot of who you are in that specific setting. But while you're the one holding the Sharpie, you're the one who gets to write what you're going to write, the truth is what you write is actually influenced by those around you, what you're in, what setting you're in. I'm Mr. Poole because my kids know me that way. My kids' friends know me that way. Or I'm Pastor Nick to people connected to our church or community. To others, it might just be Nick. Now, what if you could write whatever you wanted to be on that name tag? Like whatever you wanted to be. That'd often be a completely different thing, wouldn't it? Like it might not be what is dictated to you by the setting you're in. I know in our culture, while we are told we can actually be whatever we want, that whatever we put our minds to, we can accomplish. And while our freedom to make that choice has never been more celebrated and encouraged, the reality is society doesn't actually give us the space to become whatever we want. Instead, who we are, the role we play in society is often handed to us. You're supposed to be this kind of a mom or dad. You're supposed to get married at this point in your life. You're supposed to parent in this way. You're supposed to spend your money in that way. While our world seems to rail against stereotypes, all it does is force people to operate based on those very stereotypes. Maybe you found yourself struggling to live up to the image you feel you're supposed to. You know when you're struggling. You know this when you're struggling with thoughts like this, like I should be further along in my life at this point, or why can't my family be like that family? Why can't my relationship be like that couple's relationship? This isn't where I expected to be in life, or how can anyone actually afford to keep up with this way of living? It's all of those things that become this rat race that we so easily find ourselves wrapped up in. What we might call the pursuit of happiness is actually a war we fight with comparison. How am I matching up to those around me? Am I who I should be? And we answer that question by looking around and comparing our lives with those around us. But what if your life was never meant to be defined by those around you? What if your identity was actually bigger than some stereotype? You see, the pen of writing what your identity is still in your hands. But for most of us, instead of writing what we want to be or what we feel we should be, we write what we're told we should be, what society says that we should be. You should be a doctor, a teacher, an engineer. You're a mom, a dad. You're single, you're divorced, you're widowed, you're an alcoholic, you're unemployed, you're bipolar, you're a failure, you're a disappointment, you're a screw up. So many different labels and identities that we carry. And what's the response? For some, we push back against what society tries to put on us. We grab the pen back and insist that we get to write our own story, that we get to choose our own identity. And some people have done that very thing in the most beautiful and creative ways. Just look at Taylor Swift. I don't know if any of you have heard of her, but she's going to do something with her life someday. She wrote this song. She wrote this song called "The Man." Some of you could probably sing it. I'm not singing it. But here's what she said. I'm so sick of running as fast as I can, wondering if I'd get there quicker if I was a man. I'm so sick of them coming at me again, because if I was a man, then, none of you know it, I'd be the man. She's famous and has made millions of dollars simply writing her own narrative about her life, her experiences, reshaping her own emotions. Why is that so popular? Because it empowers people to take back the pen, to write their own story, to choose their own identity and path. For those of you who are here who are middle-agers, maybe you know this. You remember another artist famously declaring to the world, my name is what? My name is who? My name is Slim Shady. Thank you. Someone got it. Seriously. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. So when you have a platform like Taylor Swift or Eminem, maybe you have a little more power than the rest of us to dictate what your identity is, what your narrative's going to be, ultimately who you are. But what about the rest of us? Without that kind of power, and without being really a total jerk, it's so much easier to just go with the flow, accept the stereotypes, step into the identity that is handed to us, even when that's unjustly forced upon us. I share this because I don't believe there is any greater struggle or issue in our world today than the struggle for our identity. You can go through the long list of things that are wrong in our world, and there's a long list, right? There are multiple 24-hour news cycles that fill the airs with all of the problems that are wrong with our world. It's a long one. But the greatest struggle, I believe, in our world, the greatest threat to our existence is our identity. What is our identity? The self-help industry has never been bigger, and it promises 5 steps to modify your behavior, to do what you really want to do, to become who you really want to become. And in the church world, and I'm guilty of this sometimes myself, we do much of the same with Christian overtones as we try to align our behaviors with what Jesus teaches us they should be. And while all of that is good, I believe it misses the deeper issue. Our problem isn't in what we're doing or not doing. It's recognizing who we actually are. And while maybe the response you would expect is that we should take back the pen, write our story, take control back for our lives, and quit letting society or our circumstances dictate who we should ultimately become. Is it possible, though, that we aren't the rightful author of our own story? I know it's your life, but maybe you and I aren't fully equipped to actually write the proper story. You see, what I mean is we often base our story, or the story that we want to write, in response to our context, to the context of something that has happened in our lives, or whether it was good or bad. Like our identity is in our struggles. We're an alcoholic, we're divorced, we're an anxious person. Or our identity is defined by what we've overcome or what we've accomplished. We're a recovering addict, we're an engineer, we're a parent, we're a self-made entrepreneur. We do this because it is logical and it seems to be the most obvious identity. But I'd suggest today that your identity was never meant to be based on what you've come through, but what you're going toward. You see, there's this God that fearfully and wonderfully made you. In Psalm 139, verse 13, it says these incredible words that David wrote. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. God has specifically and intentionally made you for a purpose. That purpose, that identity is not defined by the mistakes you've made or even the accomplishments you've achieved. God made you for a future that you have yet to live out, for a greater calling than any of us can step into yet. It's an identity that can only be placed upon us by our Creator. And while this seems to be a modern issue, that we struggle with our identity, it isn't a modern issue. It's been a human struggle since the beginning of time. In fact, the Apostle Paul, in the second half of the Bible we call the New Testament, he wrote extensively about what our identity is based upon, because it is a universal human struggle, every culture, every generational period. And in his writings, over and over and over again, Paul writes about what we were in contrast to what we actually are. In Romans 7:7, he says this: when you were slaves to sin. In 1 Corinthians 1:26, he says, brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. In Ephesians 2:1, he writes, as for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins. In Colossians 1:21, he says, once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds. He's constantly presenting, this is what you were. Not what you are, but this is what you were. And in each of these situations, as Paul is contrasting what you were, what your identity was grounded in has always been what you are. Not what you've become, but what Christ has made you to be. And this is the gap we find ourselves living in. And honestly, we're going to spend the rest of our existence on earth trying to reconcile our entire existence of what we were and what we are. The tension between what we've done and where we've been with what we were hoping to ultimately become. And as we've talked about this whole month, the difference between a fan and a follower, the crux of the entire conversation comes down to this question. We've gone through parts of this book, so to speak, and we've talked about the tension between being a fan and a follower, but it really comes down to this one question. What is your identity? What is your identity? Like ultimately, what is your identity? Because what you do will always flow out of who you believe you are. You will never operate as a human being in contradiction to who you believe you are, whether that's good or bad. And so Paul dives into this topic multiple times, as I mentioned. But today I want to look at one of the richest passages on identity in the entire Bible. And it's in Ephesians chapter 2. Here's what Paul writes in the first few verses, starting in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1. Here's what he says. As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. Verse 3, all of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature deserving of wrath. There's a lot packed into those three verses that we want to look at. Essentially, what Paul's outlining here is a pathway of identity. When your identity is dead, what he says dead, meaning spiritually, not physically, you live out that identity, allowing the desires, the feelings, the pressures of this world to dictate who you are and ultimately what you do. But then, in verse 4, he contrasts this with those who have experienced the supernatural work of Christ in their lives. Here's what he said in verse 4. He said, but because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace you have been saved. He's contrasting these two ideas. You've given this label of death, and you receive a label of life. While you maybe have that identity of one thing, our identity is renewed, redeemed, transformed by the work of Christ. It's not just a name change. It's the change of the entire state of our being. And we were one thing and so behaved or acted based on that thing, but now we are something entirely different. And in today's society, we often believe that what you become, what you accomplish or achieve is going to be directly tied to what you're willing to do, how hard you're willing to work. But what Paul's saying here in Ephesians 2 is that's not even the case here. Here's what he says in verse 8, just a few verses later. Verse 8, he says, for it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, It is the gift of God, not by works that no man can boast. It's not even in our effort. I know in a church that's not what you're supposed to say. I'm supposed to say, you need to try harder, work harder, give more, serve more, do more things, and then God will be pleased with you. But that's not what the Bible says. Paul is saying in Ephesians 2, your identity is not tied to your effort. Your identity isn't tied to how hard you work or how much you sacrifice. It's not tied to those things. You see, we can spend so much of our time, our energy, our effort trying to become who we feel we should become. We want to be the right person that someone else would marry. We want to be the right parents that our kids deserve. We want to be the right employee that deserves the promotion. We even want to be the right Christian that God would be pleased with, and those are all good things. But Paul completely debunks this entire premise. The metamorphosis that happens to our identity isn't because we made it happen, because we sacrificed enough, because we were willing to put forth enough effort. It is purely a gift, an act of God's undeserved and remarkable grace, period. That's it. He gives it to us. We receive it. What that means is our identity and the purpose God hopes to see fulfilled isn't based on how hard we work or even what we're willing to do. It's based on what we're willing to surrender for. See, he already did the work. Jesus went to the cross. You didn't go to the cross. I didn't go to the cross. He went to the cross. The truth we're willing to believe about ourselves that God sees in us, that's the crux of it. It's our willingness to adopt his view of us. You see, God created us for more, and Paul contrasts that more at the end in verse 10. What he writes is in direct contrast to how he described life for those operating based on this identity of death that society has given them over to. He said that those who operate with that identity of death, they're gratifying the cravings of our flesh and following its desires and thoughts. Instead of living based on the urges and seemingly unchecked desires of our flesh, Paul explains when your identity is changed, there's actually another way. Here's what he said in verse 10 of Ephesians 2. He said, "For we are God's handiwork." We are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. Now, when you read that verse out of context, it seems like, oh, that's good. God's people should do good things. We should do wonderful things. We should be out serving the poor and helping those in need. And that definitely is included there, but that's not what he's saying. That's not actually what he's saying. The word handiwork is the Greek word poema. And poema is only used one other place, in Romans chapter 1, verse 20. And what that word poema literally means is a work of art or a masterpiece. So when it says handiwork, that we translate to English handiwork, like it's not like we built something. It's a work of art or a masterpiece. It's something that brings about awe, that when you step back and you see, I don't know if you've ever been to like an art museum and you've seen like a really expensive piece of art or sculpture, something that like Michelangelo would have made or something that, Donatello would have made. Just kidding. You'll get that joke later. But we see these impressive pieces of art where we like stand back in awe. We're like, oh my goodness, that is remarkable. Like that is beauty encompassed on that canvas or that sculpture. This is what Paul was writing about. We're the handiwork. We are the masterpiece of God. And this is very different in contrast in verse 9 where he says, not by works so that no one can boast. The word works there, so handiwork, masterpiece, work of art. The word works that's translated there is the Greek word ergon. Ergon is literally just human works, like what we can conjure up on our own. He's contrasting these two works, this art, work of art, this masterpiece that God creates, and this thing that we kind of put together. You see, the difference between a fan and a follower of Jesus is that followers of Jesus are God's workmanship because they have been created, a work that only God can do in Christ Jesus. The purpose of this creation is that believers will ultimately do good works. And so in in the church, how we've translated this is, if we do good works, then we get to earn goodwill. If we do the good works, then God will turn his face toward us and have compassion on us because we're doing the right things. Right? Like that's how we work in human terms. If you do all the right things, your boss likes you. If you do all the right things, your neighbors like you. If you do all the right things, your kids like you. Or if you do all the right things, your spouse likes you. If you do all the right things, that person you're interested in likes you. Like that's how human nature works, but this isn't what Paul's talking about. God's workmanship is not achieved by good works. It is to result in good works. So it's not accomplished by good works. It should result in good works. That when we recognize our identity is in him, that we are his handiwork, that we are his masterpiece, it changes what we approach life with. That we're not just doing good works because we have to earn something. We're doing good works because we were created to do something. What that all practically means is to see the shift in identity that Paul talks about. To see all of that happen, it takes a recognition of the role or the identity that we carry. Despite what people like Taylor Swift or Eminem might portray or write about, you and I are not the rightful author of the story. As the worship team comes here, it might seem like we deserve the right to write our own story. Like you are empowered with the ability to write your own story. But we weren't the ones that started the story. The one that started the story will always write the best ending to the story. This is what Paul writes in Philippians 1:6 later. Here's what he said. He said, being confident of this, that he who began a good, what's that word there? Work. That he who began a good work. There's that word again. This is the same author. Paul wrote both of these, okay? Do you think there's a connection? There sure is. Being confident is that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. The one who started the story should always finish the story. The identity you are most created to live out, the purpose you are wired to fulfill will not be the result of something you pen, but your willingness to hand the pen to the original author. As the writer of Hebrews says in Hebrews chapter 12, Jesus is that author. Here's what he said in Hebrews 12:2. In the New King James Version, it says, Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. So today, my challenge to you is to not simply evaluate what your identity is, but evaluate who is the author of your story. Fans are in control of their destiny. Fans dictate their outcomes. Followers live out the story that's being written for them. We want to be fans. Fans allow us to be in the driver's seat. Fans allow us to be in control. But we're not fans. We're followers. Followers hand the pen over to the rightful author. God has already declared you to be his masterpiece. It's here. It's already said. It's already been determined. God has already declared you to be his masterpiece. The question isn't whether he's willing to write your story. The question is whether you're willing to trust the author. So if you were to take those name tags you were handed today, some of you already put your name on it, that's okay. But if you were to take that name tag and write something on that name tag, hello, my name is, not Slim Shady, please. What would you write? Not what everyone else calls you, not what your LinkedIn profile says, not what your driver's license says. What's the first word your heart reaches for when you see that? Is it failure, successful, divorced, anxious, addict, parent, retired, business owner, victim, perfectionist? Whatever that word is, that's probably where you've been finding your identity. And today, Jesus offers you something better. He doesn't offer you simply a better label. He offers you an entirely new life. Paul wrote in Ephesians 2, you were dead That was your label. You were carrying this label of death. But God, through Christ, has made you alive. That's not just self-improvement. That's not just 5 steps to make your life better. That's called resurrection. Something that was dead and is now alive. And resurrection is an entirely different thing, because resurrection changes everything.